Oh well, that's too bad. Okay, today I want to answer your guys' questions about stuff, but what I wanted to do is go over the rest of the quiz that we started touching on last week, and then I wanted to go have you guys your help in doing the due dates for the the next module, the contemporary processes module. And before, so what we'll do is um, maybe after we're done talking here, we'll talk about those dates, talk a little bit about it, and we'll go finish going over the quiz. Excuse me. How are you guys doing on the finding textures and doing the collages? From looking at people's attendance things, I'm really gratified that people were listening, and I got a lot of notes saying um, that the color collage won't count unless there's at least 6 different pieces of paper, or 9 or whatever it is that we talked about. So I really appreciated that people are actually listening, even if I can't remember what the assignment was. I'm also uh, one person has turned in their paper mache um, project. And again, the paper mache is you just take the biomorphic carving you did and apply paper mache to it. And I responded to everybody's thing that was turned in with maybe this needs to be a little bit smooth or smoother. These edges need to be filed down a bit, or everything is great. Go ahead, and or everything looks great. The paper mache, I think, if you are really good at it, you're going to have to do 2 layers. So it will be, and I think one person just put one layer on and turn that in. It needs to be 2 layers, like it talks about. So you'll do, plan on 2 hour-and-a-half time periods where you go down, you do it, and then the next night you sand down the areas that need to be sanded, and then do it again. And then after it dries completely, after a day or two, sand it down again so it's smooth. You don't, unless you can see foam after that second sanding, you're not going to have to put any paper mache on it again. And if you do see foam, you just put paper mache over where the foam is, and and that's good. But hopefully, it won't take anybody more than 2.5, 3 hours at tops to get that done. Uh, yeah, before I talk about, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling really super good right now, and it's not entirely because of Halloween candy. And so we may have a little bit of an abbreviated thing. Please help me remember. I want to talk about the artist critiques. You guys will, as long as you turn that in before Thanksgiving, you will get extra credit for it, um, or extra credit points added to it. But I believe that right now there's enough images and stuff on our discussion boards that everybody should be having access to, that you can pick something and then do the critique on somebody else, and then do your own critique. And we'll talk about that as well. But the first thing I wanted to do is look at the contemporary processes. And I opened that up, but I wanted to share that with people so we can talk about it. All right. Now, this is one of the things I was telling you about, that the computer, when you transfer a course over, sometimes it gets the dates really good, and sometimes it totally messes them up. But on this, I want people to, I would like to have this whole thing done over the next week and a half, because it's not going to take that long. A lot of it is think work, and so my goal is to not have this done on November 10th. I want to change. I'm going to go in and change that right now, and I'll give you my idea of what I'm thinking it needs to have. And then you guys can tell me if that seems appropriate. Okay, so I'm thinking November 19th for that. That gives us, and that's the work log, which means uh, we've got to have this responded probably on the same day is going to be just fine too, maybe a day early. I don't know. This is a little bit problematic. You guys don't need to reply in this discussion uh, for the different things that you see, but it is really helpful if you for when you share the things. And I'm thinking as soon as you get it done, go ahead and share it. So what this conceptualism, we'll talk about it tonight as well, and then I really want to talk about it on Wednesday. The hardest thing about the conceptualism is that um, people are scared of it, and there's no reason to be scared of it. So, and I'll show you really quick what conceptualism is. We did talk about it a little bit last week, but I want to reiterate. Okay, this is Microsoft Bing search engine. I love the name for it. There's a little bit of background that I want to give on this. And when you go through the module and read this stuff, you'll be able to see a lot of the background. Does anybody here know or remember the Plato's Allegory of the Cave? Is that anything that's familiar with you guys at all? Okay. As artists, it is absolutely imperative that you find some time to look up Allegory of the Cave. And I included a couple video links to it. There's one that I particularly enjoy that we'll watch next week. But in essence, what Plato he talks about, let's say that people live all their lives chained up in a cave, facing the wall of a cave, with behind them, and they're in devices that prevent them from turning around and looking, but behind them is a open area, and then behind that is a giant fire. And so what they see their whole lives is the fire's reflection on the wall that's in front of them. And as things go along, or as their life goes on, people walk through the cave in between them and the fire, holding objects. And the prisoners will assign names to these objects when all they see is the shadows of the objects cast poorly on the wall in front of them by the flickering flames of the fire. Does everybody get that kind of image? It's like making shadow puppets when you're camping. But imagine somebody whose entire life is like that, chained up in a cave. That's all they see. They've invented a language, they've invented concepts for things based on what they see reflected in the fire. And then one day, one of the prisoners is his shackles are taken off and he's forced outside the cave, forced into the real world. What's going to happen? You know, seeing sunlight for the first time. It's going to take him a while for his eyes to even adjust to the light. And he's stumbling around. He's probably crying for a while. And then after a bit of time, he starts seeing things. Most likely, this is the first time he's ever seen color that's identifiable at all. He's only been in a red and gray environment basically, and he sees things that remind him of the shadows that were cast on the wall. Like maybe they cast a shadow of a tree, and he sees real trees growing in all their abundance. Maybe somebody cast the shadow of a rabbit on the wall, and he sees a real rabbit. And you can imagine the confusion this guy has when he stumbles upon a pond and looks, and suddenly he sees a reflection of himself. Imagine how mind-blowing that would be. And then this guy, after a while, he lives there. He's able to communicate with people. He's learns enough about this that he realizes it's a magical world. So he runs back to the cave and tries to get his friends. He says, "Hey, look, I can take your shackles off. Let's go and go outside. It's amazing out there." How do you think the other prisoners are going to respond to that? Do you think that's something that they would really want to do? If the cave is all they've known their entire life, do you think that they think that this guy was sane, even? Has he flipped his cork? I'd like to hear from somebody. What do you think about what kind of a mind blowing experience that would be? First, to be thrust out of the cave, and then how would you think that people would respond when the person who left the cave came back?
I think it'd probably be pretty uncomfortably overwhelming to be thrust out of the cave. And I think that when you came back, the people in the cave might fear you, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I can you see where Plato is going with this, Jocelyn? What do you think he's addressing? What kind of ideas is he addressing?
Probably new, radical, unconventional ideas that people may be unfamiliar with, and it's like hard to grasp a new concept for them.
Yeah, and it's completely out of anybody's experience. And what's Wassily Kandinsky talks about this a little bit in his book Spirituality and Art, which I really recommend you guys read. It's maybe like 70, 80 pages at the most. But what Plato is talking about is, what if you get to the point where you do see the world of the real, or he called it the ideal? Where does meaning actually reside? What is reality? How do we define reality? And how do we relate to reality? What is real? Are there different kinds of real? Because the experience those guys had in the cave was very real to them. And then all of a sudden he finds out, wow, there's a lot more. He's not necessarily saying that their experience was false, but the guy returning realizes how shallow it is. And Plato was doing this to talk about how what led to the execution of Socrates. Uh, Socrates was executed for being a rabble rouser. Essentially, he was trying to get people to think, and it ended up getting him killed. So think about those kinds of concepts, right? We talked about Marcel Duchamp a little bit. What's he famous for? Do you remember?
Fountain,
Fountain, which was actually what?
a urinal.
Yep, a urinal. And he set it up on a pedestal in an art gallery to kind of force people to engage with the idea, well, what is art? What makes art art? And so far, we've talked about several different media that everybody's used. I mean, that we have photographers, illustrators, um, digital artists, all sorts of people here. And then we talked about other media as well. When we start talking about new processes, in essence, how I decided to go, the direction I decided to go in on this was the radical change that happened with how people approached a definition of art, which defined their use of contemporary processes. Because contemporary process, we could just limit that to digital work, because that is very contemporary. or plastics, acrylics, maybe that's contemporary. But right after World War II, a lot of artists around the world recognized that humanity needed something to deal with the constant level of fear and stress. There's a chemist who in the 1990s wrote a really interesting article. It's like 100 pages long, super, super boring for the most part. But when you get done with it, you realize what he's talking about. It's pretty amazing. He was the one who said back or predicted back in the 90s that a lot of people would have uh, problems with gluten and fibromyalgia because he said that as a chemist, he was saying that with constant levels of stress, you get 3 generations producing children that live through constant levels of stress and think, oh well, World War II, not that big of a deal. They kids from about the age of 4 on were being shown weekly in school the duck and cover video because everybody knew the atomic bombs would go off. There was, your neighbor could be a pinko commie out to destroy your family and you and everybody you know. And the Cold War is going on constantly. People are over in the military, overseas, doing things that they can't tell anybody. And this constant level of stress, while people are still trying to recover from the trauma of war, led to a lot of different things. And this chemist was saying that constant levels of adrenaline, increased use of caffeine, like think monster drinks today, and just never allowing the body to come to rest is going to impact the chemistry of the body, and that's why people will be exhausted all the time, have constant pain, chronic pain syndrome, have incredibly increased aversions to gluten in wheat, which a lot of people think, oh, that's just a bunch of gunk. Before World War II, so about 1933, wheat generally had less than 10% of the gluten in it now. Uh, People that were engineering seeds or engineering foodstuffs realized that they could dramatically increase the yield volume wise of things like a loaf of bread by increasing gluten. And so a particular strain of wheat called quadritriticale was actually, and it's referenced in a Star Trek episode 20 years later, but it was developed specifically to survive harsh climates and produce highly glutenated wheat that could produce foodstuffs that actually had significant volume. And that's why, and that started, that was originally produced for a lot of Russian farmers because the Soviet Union was going through a really harsh time and the US was trying to help them. And then after World War II, that came over to the US. And that became the principal stock for the US wheat consumption. And, so you get all that stuff coupled together, and it's going to be a high stress environment. And then stepping into 1950s and 60s, that's where you get the abstract expressionism, where you get paintings that are fields of color or just painting streams of color, like Rothko and Pollock. But you get a lot of other people that are just experimenting with what does art mean? What makes art? What do people want to see? And a lot of artwork from that period, and you look at Morris Louis, Barnett Newman, Lee Krasner, and a lot of these men and women that were doing these fantastic things were trying to get away from triggering symbols and develop a sort of visual meditations for people just to find a moment to escape from the trauma that people were living. It's interesting as well that this is the time period that the FBI says marks the rise of the serial killer in the US, which I think is fascinating in a really awful, dark, horrible way. But, so into this, people are trying to get away from, like I said, triggering symbols, trying to help folks find new vocabularies. This is where the U.S. government develops a new palette of colors for both military installations and public schools that are designed to keep people calm. Did you guys know that? You know that really atrocious aqua that you still sometimes see as an enamel in the basement of really old swimming pool buildings? Have you ever, you know what I'm talking about? The really terrible. Okay, Christina knows. And then there was also a really awful pinkish brown was another one. And you can see these colors in a lot of military equipment at the time. They were kind of the baby tones of the military khaki and green. Really awful stuff. But and you'll see that in advertising through the late 50s, early 60s, where and fashion as well, fabric design, textile design. Uh, the federal government was designing colors that were intended to help people be calm. And so into this kind of mix, we get people that are trying to express something without easily identifiable um, artifacts to do the expressing. And there were a group of artists that thought, you know what, other people are using paint as their medium, or fabric, or browns, or brass, or whatever. I want to do something else. I want to use that and create the final work with the medium of people's imagination. And Marcel Duchamp really started this, and the Dadaists back in the late 30s. I'm sorry, not in the late 30s, late 20s. I'm wrong again. Right after World War One, was that 1917, 1918, 1919, in that realm, uh, where they were trying to address the idea that the audience has a responsibility to be engaged in the art. And as part of that responsibility, you also need to claim your permission to label something as art, or give yourself the permission to pursue an exploration of why something is labeled art. Why is it permitted to be displayed as art? And one argument is that we gave up that permission to people who are art critics who decided what art is. And I think there's a lot to that. But you look at these artists like Marcel Duchamp and the Cubists, they need you to be intelligent. They need their audience to be smart and observe and look at what they're doing, because they are trying to hold a conversation with you. And all the artists that have come after that, they are expecting you to be smart. They're expecting you to engage. And so that's where that brings us into conceptual art. And I'll show this image. Okay. Now you notice these are two images of the same piece called One in Three Chairs. What are some of the differences that you see? One difference I see is it looks like this photo is taken of this chair in that setting. So the floor is dark, so the photo is dark. The floor is light, so the photo is light. Do you guys see that as well? What are some of the other things that are different? Is the chair the same? And you guys, you'll have to use your microphone, because I can't see anybody when I share a screen like this.
The angle is different, and so it's hard to see what the seat of the chair looks like in the image on the left.
Okay, so it could be the same chair, it could be different.
Yeah.
Good. I'm thinking it does look like the same chair, but yeah, it's obvious that the one on the right, the person stood was a little bit taller than the photographer on the left, because you can see more of the seat. Anybody see a third difference?
The text is different,
Yes,
or at
excellent.
least much larger and on different paper also.
Yes. And I think that it was shorter on the left and longer on the right, definitely. Now, looking at the name, One in Three Chairs, What is the three chairs that Joseph Kossuth is talking about? What are the three chairs?
I would say the actual chair, the picture of the chair, and I'm assuming the text has something to do with a chair, maybe a definition.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right. The text is the definition of a chair. So why would this? So that's where the three chairs are. But why would this be called one chair? Or what does the one chair refer to?
Only one of them can be used as a chair.
Yeah, I this is something that I think is interesting because I get a group of three people and there are four opinions about this. And that is, yeah, there's only one chair that you can actually use. Is the picture a chair as well, though?
I think
Yes.
it's based on how you define a chair. The definition of the chair is also a chair. The actual chair
Yeah,
is a chair. The picture of
yeah,
a chair could be a chair.
yes, exactly. And it's all based on that one chair, like Christina said, that's right in the middle. What's fascinating to me, and I'm going to quit sharing that now. What's fascinating to me about this is, we look at that, the three chairs, all of us get the three chairs immediately. The one chair, what's the one chair? Is it what all three of these things are defining? Is it that everything is related to the one actually usable chair? That's also, or is it a reference to what Plato described as the world of the ideal or the truly real? One of the arguments that Plato made was that the reason we can walk into a room and we see the couch, we see the window, we see the table. It's very rare that, unless you're living in a dorm on campus, that all those are going to be identical in every house that you walk into. However, Plato argued that there must be something that we refer to. Like the guy who was forced out of the cave, he sees for the first time in his life a real tree that everything else is a shadow of. And Plato is saying, our subconscious mind uh, is connected to the world of the ideal or the world of the truly real. And the perfect or ideal or truly real window exists only in that world, or the ideal table exists only in that world, or the ideal chair. And everything else we experience, our minds are going back to our subconscious connection to the world of the real, and that's how we assign meaning. That's how we understand meaning. So we see a window and all windows and all their sizes, shapes, and configurations. We know they're windows because somehow there is a connecting definition. And that definition is something that's very hard to articulate cleanly, which is why Plato, I think, suggested that it's something we all connect to in our subconscious mind. Whether or not you agree with that, it seems to me that the one chair, perhaps Joseph Kossuth, by sharing all these different kinds of ways of looking at a chair, because even that one real usable chair isn't a real usable chair because the only way we interact with it is a photo of it, and maybe he is also connecting to the idea that there is somehow this ultimate reality that we connect to, or suggesting that there is an ultimate concept of a chair that we use to define our relationship to structures that we label as chairs. But it's interesting because even in that conversation, now we're all thinking about things like what is a chair? How many chairs have I sat in? How many colors of chairs do I have in my house? What is a chair? What functions as a chair? Could a stick with a flat bit on top be a chair? Or does it have to be a certain way like this? Is it anything that you sit on? All of us are engaged in this kind of conversation with the ghost of Joseph Kossuth in the corner, kind of smiling smugly, saying to himself, "Oh yes, I got that started." And this is where conceptual art lies. The artist has not made a finished product out of anything tangible. They haven't made a finished digital painting and said that's the final product. What they've done, their final product is the thought processes that are going inside of your brain after you encounter the stuff that they make. That's what they're sculpting. They're sculpting your brains. Who else thinks that's kind of cool? So, and that's why it's called conceptual art. And conceptual art is difficult for a lot of people to deal with because you are sculpting people's imaginations or concepts. It's very hard to market that. Disney does a really good job at it, but it's very hard for normal people to market it. And so galleries weren't really interested in conceptual art for a long time, but until donors to the gallery started realizing there's something here, and they started sponsoring explorations and showings of conceptual art. And then there started to be a market for it so people could do it more. But a lot of conceptual artists will get grants and they'll get volunteer help. They'll do all sorts of different stuff to engage people and get them excited about conceptual art. I remember my grandpa, the first time he encountered Picasso, it was because of my mom and me, and we were doing art classes. He said anybody could do that. And that's absolutely true. That is completely true. Anybody can do that. The difference is there's only one person who can do it first. And then suddenly the floodgates are open and everybody realizes, yes, that's now a possibility. Blue as a word was not used in anything written down in any language in at least this side of the Asian continent until the Greeks started writing about it in about the 4th century BC. Do you think blue existed before then? People would describe what it was like Homer talks about the wine dark sea or the brilliant sky, but nobody assigned a color to it about the 4th century BC. And now, how many different definitions of blue can you find going into a paint store? Isn't it interesting? Would you? I would be willing to bet that blue has always existed. There is a specific frequency. There's a span of frequencies of visual spectrum wavelengths that we register as blue. I think that's existed since the birth of the universe. However, in Western culture, it did not exist as a word until only 2,500 years ago. And now, how many shades of blue do you think there are in the world? Now that we can see it, there's an amazing number. It's incredible. That's the kind of mind expansive stuff that happens with conceptual art, or that can happen with conceptual art. And there is on the, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through this module really quick. The background has a lot of really good videos, and I want you to follow through this, do this as well as you can. Hopefully, I would like you to go through this as much as possible before we meet next week. So, this due date I'm going to change to next Tuesday. And this has a lot of really interesting ideas. And then we talk about fascinating artists. And these guys are absolutely amazing. Christo and Jean-Claude is, they are really amazing. They have a website. All this stuff should be working. I checked everything. If anything is giving you a hard time, let me know. And think about what these people are doing. One of the things that's amazing about Christo and Jean-Claude is that they are the guys that wrap stuff with plastic. What happens when the first time you wrap something. If you present something to somebody and it's wrapped, what's the first thing they want to do?
Unwrap it.
Unwrap it. Exactly. It's our monkey mind. Prophet Muhammad referred to it as our monkey mind. When we're super curious, we want to know, we have to know. And it's interesting to me, you put something on the counter, nobody, and don't even look at it, nobody cares. The moment you wrap it, your kids go, I was going to use a word that I don't want to offend anybody with. They go absolutely bonkers wanting to know what it is. And that's what makes presents so much fun, because people have to, you're engaging their curiosity. So part of the process we're also doing in that contemporary processes is wrapping. You know, what kinds of things can we wrap with? How do we do that? How do we engage that monkey mind? Now, we talked about conceptual art as sculpting the concepts, the ideas that people have. Why do you think that art that involves wrapping or cocooning, why do you think that that would fit into the conceptual art umbrella? Several years ago, Jean-Claude and Christo were invited to to Florida to wrap some islands in plastic. This particular area that they went to, the people in the town, they were just spitballing ideas, and they thought, well, let's invite Jean-Claude and Christo to come. Nobody likes coming to our town. You know, tourism in Florida, in this area of Florida, was just tanking out. There was nobody coming by. And the few stupid people that were coming by were using illegal motors, propellers, and damaging the manatee population. Uh, and they were causing some serious issues. So Jean-Claude and Christo, they thought, okay, this sounds great. Let's do it. So the whole community brought them in. The whole community helped them to get grants to pay for it. And the whole community, everybody now had jobs because they were helping Jean-Claude and Christo to put the piers around these islands. They were helping, they were volunteering their time to get the word out. They were contacting news channels and everything. What do you think happened over the next couple of years and is still having an impact on that community?
They probably received a lot of visitors as a result of the press,
Yeah.
how unusual the project was. How
Yeah.
is the plastic handled? That sounds like an environmental nightmare.
That's something
What
that
happens to the plastic?
it was plastic that was engineered specifically for this project, and it was designed to be environmentally safe. When they were all done with it, they were able to dispose of it correctly. And uh, it was funny because environmental groups that didn't know anything about what was going on came out and were really upset. But there were environmental groups already there that had been engaged by the community and Jean-Claude and Christo specifically for that whole purpose. And it's funny to me when people get their nose bent out of shape for somebody else because they haven't bothered to do any research. But you're right, Jean-Claude and Christo, they engaged people's curiosity, and holy cow, that monkey mind was blown way off the charts. There were thousands of news reports done all around the world. People came literally from all around the world to see this project. The entire communities were completely revitalized, and a huge benefit was that they were able to uh, get a lot more money for patrolling the waters, for informing people about the manatee population. And the population was down to a ridiculously tiny number, like less than few dozen in this area. And it's since it's shown a complete rebirth, resurgence, and pretty amazing stuff. And then you get somebody like Nick Cave. His sound suits are absolutely astonishing. That's what he does. He creates these costumes for for moving in. He calls them sound suits because they're designed to make noises as you move around in them. And he describes himself as being almost crippled by social anxiety. And by creating these suits and doing things, not only has he been able to express himself, but he has become a voice for massive segments of the population that felt completely disenfranchised. And it's not just what he does, but everything he represents, and it's pretty amazing. And then one of my favorite is so watch all these videos. Judith Scott is absolutely astonishing. Uh, that's a story that we can talk about next week that I think is just incredible. And then one person that I do not have on here is Alice. Oh, I can't. I I'm sorry. I think his name is Federico Alice, but he does. He did something in Mexico called Faith Moves Mountains, where people were completely hopeless, felt utterly powerless. And his conceptual work, Francis Alice is his name, and his last name is spelled Alys. And what he did is he asked for anybody who had a spare day, come out on this day, and we're going to use shovels and move a mountain. And he had over 300 volunteers. They spent all day doing it, but they actually moved a mountain by a couple feet. And you go into an area of Mexico City that is depressed, where the biggest hope anybody has for advancement is finding the right person to kidnap. Think about that for just a second. And Francis Alice pulled people out of that space and brought them together to move a topographical feature far enough for satellite maps to have to be changed. Isn't that amazing? So this kind of conceptual art, this is the kind of stuff that I think is amazing. And Judith Scott, when she was young, she was deaf and she was partially blind. She also is on the spectrum. She and her sister did everything together. And then at a very young age, her parents were convinced to put her into an institution. Her sister, after their parents died, her sister spent years tracking her down. Finally found her. By that time, the sister had made enough that she could support Judith Scott living in an assisted care facility and could see her all the time. And it was like the sun came out after a terrible storm, and Judith Scott just started producing art. And her story is magnificent. It's insanely amazing and very cool. And she kind of combines all the best aspects of all these conceptual artists. So this artist review, this thing I think is really, I want you to watch those videos and just pick 2 of those 13 artists that are talked about. And then follow these 4 prompts. And what I'm wondering from you guys, we're going to talk about this more next week. What I think I'm going to do is change these things to reflect that next week. And then on Wednesday, we'll talk again about due dates. I'm going to change the due dates. So it's next Sunday is what I'm thinking. But if you guys need me to change that again, that's fine. We can change it again. So I know it looks like a lot of things are kind of crammed up together, but honestly, these are shorter projects that don't take as much of your energy as the others. And the conceptual, I really, I'd like you guys to do it. And a lot of the times, the doing is the hardest part about it. So, and then we have a quiz as well, and I think I'm gonna I'll make the quiz due like next Friday so that we have a chance to talk about it in class. But does that sound okay right now? As long as you guys know that between now and next Wednesday, I want you guys at the very least to go through all the videos, read that material, read everything, and at least do the quiz, and then that'll give us something, or at least if you don't make the quiz, that's fine. I guess I'll have that due on Friday, but remind me next Wednesday that we will talk through the quiz and get that all taken care of. But I want you guys to look at the videos and everything, and we'll talk about it in depth more on Wednesday. But a lot of the times the conceptual art stuff is passed over completely. A lot of people think it's nonsense. What's amazing to me is that 3D artists have found a new material to sculpt with, and that's your brains. And I think that it's totally awesome, and not in a goopy, gross way. But I did want to go over, see the quiz a little bit. And I want to just share with some of the answers and stuff, if that's okay with you guys. I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. What I would like to talk about some of the answers. And if you didn't get all the points you wanted, you can always go back over the quizzes and talk about them. So, I'm sorry, my brain is going on several different things. If you didn't get all the points you wanted, go back over the quiz, redo it, turn it in, get more points. Okay, here we go. What I was really happy to see is that everybody was able to get these 12 words. How did you guys, those of you who have already taken this quiz, how did you guys come up with those words? Did you just start going through the list or brainstorming like we talked about in the class? Okay. And did you notice that the first few are really tough to come up with, but after that it gets easier and easier? Okay, good. And this is in your text, and this as well. Who here believes that casting is a simple and direct process? Nobody, and nobody should. It is complicated. And visual texture is primarily experienced with the eyes. That is absolutely true. The hint is visual. Now, this is something that I really wanted to talk about a little bit. We're looking at two different sculptures using light. James Turrell in Sky Space, right here. We have a woman sitting down on a bench looking up into the sky. And he's built this into a crater, and it's basically a room where all you see is an unframed circle, and it shows off the natural sky, and that's it. That's what it is. Then we get Dan Flavin's Untitled, the Chinati Project. Looking at both of these things at the same time, what are some of the differences that you see right away?
Natural light versus fluorescent lights.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent. Jocelyn or Christina, could you speak to the angles that you see? Excellent, Whitney. What is
The
the difference?
natural light at the top, that round dome that provides light, makes it much more soft and diffused. The light it just sort of glows and bounces off the walls in a much more gentle way than below,
Yeah,
which is
excellent.
a lot more intense and harsh looking.
Yeah, excellent. Now, Jocelyn, imagining you're the person who's there, how do you think the personal experience is different for each one?
Is it kind of, I talked about this in my response, but um kind of depending on how long you're there. In the top one, if you stay long enough, you can see it like make its way across as the sun moves and as the light changes. And the bottom one is unmoving, unchanging, so you get the same experience um, no matter when you're there.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. The top one is going to change all the time. What's interesting to me is, have you guys ever seen Blade Runner? It's a 40-year-old movie. It's probably the best science fiction movie that's ever been made. I think it definitely in the top five. But what's fascinating about that is you look at the people that are farther away from connecting with their humanity, and they live in environments that are lit by fluorescent lighting with those harsh lines. And then as people are trying to connect with their humanity or to grab for it, to try to reach for it, then the lighting becomes more warm and natural throughout the movie. And that's, that varies from character to character depending on where they are in that journey. And I think it's absolutely fascinating. And with Dan Flavin, you look at that and you see the angles, which you should give a sort of dynamic energy to it. But like Jocelyn says, it doesn't change. It's still, instead of feeling dynamic, it feels like it's off balance. It doesn't engage you in any sort of inviting way. At least I think so. And by contrast, the the sky one, James Turrell's, the lines are very balanced. It is a very static room, but it feels a lot more engaging and inviting because of the curves, because of the way the light moves and engages you. And I think that's really fascinating to me. Now, on this one, um, what we're looking for, it says, what is the term used when artists like those above create textural optical illusions? The word that it is in your text, and this is made out of ceramic, and this is made out of polymer clay. But it looks like a completely naturalistic banana peel, and it looks like a completely naturalistic leather jacket. The term we're looking for is trompe-l'oeil or fool of the eye. So remember that. Did any of you guys get that wrong? Okay, good. Now, this is always interesting. I want to talk about this a little bit. Manipulation of the surface of an object to enhance its beauty is intimately bound to cultural and historical definitions of beauty. Can you guys each give me an example of that? Well, first, do you agree with that statement? I think it's really hard to disagree with it. Give me an example of how that relates to, for me, I like wearing these shirts. These shirts, they're natural fibers. They're open sleeves, so the wind comes in and cools down my arms when I'm working, which is really nice. When I'm working out in the garage, and you can fry an egg on the ground. But it gives a certain feeling to me when I put it on. There's a certain sense of calm that I get. And what's really interesting is if I make the mistake, which happens quite a bit, of wearing this to a faculty meeting, there is an instant reaction that people get when they look up and see me. And then there's a dismissal. The instant reaction is this is a professional meeting. What the hell is he thinking? There's a certain dress code for professionalism. And then everybody remembers, oh, he's an artist. Artists are kind of like the kids, you know, who've been dropped on their heads too many times as a child, just, you know, leave them alone. We'll let them slide. But it's really fascinating that that kind of reaction is something that I can feel going into a room. What other experiences have you guys noticed or have had related to this idea?
One thing that just came to my mind is piercings. Um, some cultures find piercings very beautiful. People have a ton of piercings in their ears, all over their body, their nose. Um, but then you go someplace like Utah, especially Utah County, and piercings. It's funny, I have a nose piercing, and kids all the time ask me what's in my nose, and I tell them, "Oh, it's like a earring, but it's in my nose," and they go, "Ew." It's I'm very used to that reaction. But I just think it's funny how what some person might literally say ew at is another culture's like beauty standard, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good example. That's excellent. And I've heard some of those kids who said "ooh." Yeah, very good. How about Whitney or Christina?
The thing that I mentioned when I took the test was body hair. I think, you know, we have a Western standard that women need to have smooth legs. And I think that's kind of less now than it was when I was a teenager. But in the 90s, when I was a teenager, if you had stubble on your legs, everybody was, you would get the ooh factor, right? It was gross. Like you needed to keep your legs shaved. And I think that's still the case to some degree, and like with underarms too. But in lots of other cultures, that's not, people don't think about that at all. It's a totally natural, normal thing and not a concern.
Yeah, and it's like with in traditional Sikh culture, all body hair should be allowed to grow, and so you know, very different. I remember in high school in the '80s, for me, uh, if a guy shaved his legs, he had to explain himself every single time anybody noticed. And you know, the get out of jail free card was, oh, I'm an athlete. You know, and then everybody pretends that they understand. How about you, Whitney?
In my response, I talked about like plastic surgery. You can see through like the 1900s into the 2000s, the fluctuation of beauty standards, especially with women. So, I mean, right now, a lot of people are doing lip filler or getting nose jobs because they want more of the Western nose, a smaller petite nose, and all of that.
Yeah, that is really interesting to me. There are plenty of cases where plastic surgery is completely appropriate. I mean, I have friends that work as volunteer and surgical uh, volunteer dental and surgical personnel. They go all around the world doing reconstructive surgery in areas where um, people are used to being born with like cleft palates and stuff like that. And they and like after accidents and things like that. But it is interesting to me where people, I think it's perfectly appropriate to use plastic surgery to look the way you feel you need to look. But there's a lot of times when I'm thinking to myself, how what has happened in this person's life that they believe that that is beautiful. You know, and then I also have my friends who have things installed. Like I have one friend who has a series of horns around here, and I just think that's baffling to me. but then on the other hand, you also have a tradition of scarification among the Yoruba peoples with the Ife, uh, where their sign of nobility was having these vertical lines down your face, and the closer they were together, and the more unblemished they were as the scars healed, the more self-control you demonstrated. And it was just, once you realize what goes into that, it's holy cow, how can that not be beautiful? You know that but that is really fascinating to me. All of that, yeah, excellent examples. This one is kind of a complicated one. If you miss any of them, go ahead and go back and redo them. But most people are getting all 6 of them just fine. And then I really loved reading people's responses to this. The standing man with the outstretched arm. Did you guys? Do you feel that the texture and gesture of this really helped you to connect with the sculpture, or helped you in how you related to it? I guess I should say. I guess that's better.
I would say so. If it was a smooth and shiny one, it wouldn't give the same feeling or aura to it. It feels very worn and heavy and a little bit somber.
Yeah, for me, this the way it is feels a lot more humanistic and relatable. And I'm afraid that if it was a Henry Moore kind of smooth thing, it just wouldn't feel like I could connect with this as well. You know, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. Henry Moore is more a celebration of ideal than anything else, and this feels more like a real connection and the sharing of a burden. I so yeah, I think that's excellent. All right, I am at a point where I've got to wrap it up pretty soon here. Um, I hate feeling like this because I love eating. I think food is wonderful and amazing. Whenever I go to another country or another environment, the first thing I connect to is the food, and I hate when I'm feeling sick around Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's just awful. Or iftar. That just makes me angry. So I'm going to have to wrap things up. But I wanted to remind people there's enough stuff in the discussion boards. Everybody should have access to the discussion. Oh, that reminds me of something else. If you submitted something as an HEIC file, my system can't recognize it. So please go through and change it to a JPEG or PDF or anything like that and resubmit it, and then I'll regrade it. I am really happy with how things are going, and I notice that there are a lot of students that are going and turning in past assignments that haven't been turned in yet. That's great. Keep that up. Keep doing it. Uh, I wanted to remind people that there are peer and self critiques that are due at the end of the term. I would really appreciate it if people would start working on those now. There's already been a couple turned in, and that's awesome. You will get, as long as you turn these in before Thanksgiving, you will get, actually, well, let's just do it through the weekend of Thanksgiving. You will get extra credit points. So please turn that in. The more that we see, the more people can see how to do it. But the ones that have been turned in, I think people have done pretty well. And remember what the 4 tools, the 4 steps of artistic critique. What's the first one? It starts with a D.
Discovery.
Almost. Describe. Very
Describe.
cool.
Sorry.
And yeah, this is a spot quiz. It was not fair. Second one starts with an A.
Analyze.
Analyze. Perfect. The third one starts with an I.
Interpret.
Perfect. Excellent. And the fourth one starts with an E.
Evaluate.
Evaluate. Absolutely right. So just make sure that you get those in there when you do that, and they should not be over 5 minutes long. Please do not do over 5 minutes long. I think that the longest I think I told you the longest we've had was over 30 minutes. Didn't I tell you that? Don't do that. Not even as a joke. It's horrible. And nobody else in the class will like you. But hey, thanks for coming and spending an hour with me tonight. I hope you guys had an absolutely wonderful week and weekend. If you have any questions, please hit me up. Uh, it looks like I'm getting emails through the email system. If you send it to me directly at my Utah UVU email address, or also several of you have communicated with me via text, and that works great as long as you give me your name and the class you're in. So I'm sorry I don't think I missed any emails because I didn't see any. But if you need me to get a hold of me, the ones that I've seen have been through the UVU email and my text. So that works really well. All right, thanks, folks. I hope you guys had an absolutely wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Get feeling
Thank you.
better.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.